America's first policies have been going on now for the past 6 months. I just wonder how much of a surge in business have you had since President Trump took office?
Well, President Trump's arrival on the scene has generated a huge amount of interest and concern in the business community as well as with our individual clients. He's had a tremendous impact. We've been involved in situations where we've had to prepare statements for CEOs of companies and for the board of different companies and whatever, because they were so concerned about his policies.
We, of course, also have the renegotiations of Nafta. Do you expect any impact to your clients as those businesses operating closely with Mexico could get affected with more regulations?
I would say there are two aspects to it. The first is that NAFTA has mobility provisions in the treaty. And there's been very little said about the mobility provisions, but they're extremely important to both Canada and Mexico in terms of moving people back and forth across the border. So we're really not certain, how those provisions will come out. We know the Canadians are going to push for expansion of the mobility provisions, whereas the U.S. is really under fairly tight orders from Congress not to expand those provisions. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, but that'll be a big part of it.
Austin, I think there was also talk about, if tariffs can't be put on automobile, imports, let's say, from Mexico, what about higher wages in Mexico to try to bring back market share to the U.S.? Is something like that going to work?
Well, it would be very difficult to administer, but the idea is to try to create a level playing field. And at the same time, the U.S. government has a big interest in that, as well as the Canadians, in terms of just trying to raise the level of employment and the salary levels of the Mexican workers. So it's a workers' rights issue in large part as well.
So what do you think of, out of Trump's policies, what do you think is actually going to happen on the immigration front? And where is that going to be in relation to health care, in relation to tax reform? And now we heard Trump, of course, in this press conference, he was trying to focus on infrastructure, but it got detracted by what happened in Charlottesville. Where do you think immigration is going to stand eventually?
Well, I think Trump has expressed less interest in immigration recently than he did when he was campaigning. So it seems as though it's dropped off somewhat. Now, he's still very interested in the wall and in enforcement issues. But as far as immigration policy and protecting U.S. workers, there I think we have to see some action by Congress. There's very little that he can really do directly himself, and therefore we're basically going to see whether Congress actually moves some legislation. He, as you know, endorsed a bill a few days ago that basically would cut U.S. immigration in half and move employment-based immigration to a point system. And of course, we have the H-1B visas, which will be a big deal.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was headed. Let's delve into a little bit of those programs, because H-1B visa is the one that's right now on the chopping board, but also the International Entrepreneur Visa program, which has been delayed for next year. What are the specific programs that people watching from here in Asia should be monitoring closely to see if we're going to see any changes?
The H-1B is really the most important, and of course we have a system which is greatly oversubscribed. There's a cap of 85,000 people a year, and the number of applicants far exceeds that. So we have a lottery system. So that will change to a priority system based on a combination of educational level and compensation level. So I think that everyone needs to be very aware of that. Because what will happen is that persons in higher paying jobs will get a priority. And persons who have master's degrees, and particularly degrees from U.S. universities, will get a priority. So it'll still benefit graduates of U.S. universities, particularly in STEM fields, science, technology, education, and math. But I think we can be fairly certain that will happen. As to the entrepreneur provision, I think that really you could argue was really exceeded the president's authority to create an entrepreneur program without legislation from Congress. So I'm not sure we're going to see that again in its present, or in its old form, you might say. But what is important for your viewers, I think, is the EB-5 program. That's persons who invest money in these mainly real estate kind of arrangements in the United States. And I think the EB-5 program, we're likely to see some major changes in raising the threshold to really pretty much twice as much as what it is currently. The 500,000 will go up over a million, certainly. They're looking at 1,300,050. And there's both legislation pending, which is going to be part of the Budget Reconciliation Act, so that's very likely to actually be passed, or regulations. So I think we'll see some action there.